So intimacy has been the goal of my talks thus far, and I've been outlining intimacy steps that I just pull from recovery, right? And the first step that we have to walk through in order to be intimate people, to have intimate relationship with God and others, is I have to actually realize that I'm not God. I have to realize that I'm out of control, that I am powerless to control the tendency to do the wrong thing. Unless, and the reason why I believe this is the first step is because unless I actually realize how out of control I am, I can't actually operate within the space of reality. I'm operating under a paradigm that isn't true, that doesn't exist. If you want real relationship with somebody, you have to understand what really is happening, what really is going on. And the more control I think I have that I don't, the less opportunity I have for real, genuine, deep relationship. So the next step after I recognize that I'm not God is intimacy step number 2, which is I earnestly believe that God exists, that I matter to him, and that he has the power to help me recover. There's a lot to unpack in this step. So today, for sake of time, I only want to focus on earnestly believe that God exists. So once I've realized that I'm not God and I'm out of control, I must recognize who is in control. And when I recognize that there is somebody outside of my control that is in control, I have to identify who that person is. I have to identify and establish reality. If I'm not in control and somebody else is, unless I actually am operating in the parameter of who is in control, I'm not actually going to be living the life that I'm designed for, because I have a designer. I have to calibrate. I have to get right back on track with how I'm made, who made me, and I have to sync up to the right foundation, right? Which is why it's so important to identify who that God is. It can't be any God, because if I prescribe to, let's say, an Islamic faith, the Islamic God is very, very different than the Christian God. I'm going to save you a lot of time, and I'm going to just tell you that the God that I believe is God is the God who we know walked this earth. The Bible says that Jesus is the image of the invisible God, which means if you've seen Jesus, you've seen the Father. He says he's come on behalf of the Father. He says in John 14:6, you can't get to the Father except through me. There's these claims that the Bible lays out that Jesus represents. But if you think about more than that, think about deeper than that, if Jesus is the example, the expression of the invisible God, let's look at Jesus' life. What was Jesus like? Was he prideful? No. He was the most humble person. He didn't care about money. He literally, this is how I know he didn't care about money. He literally died with nothing. The renditions and the examples that you see on TV of the cross, they pale in comparison to reality. Jesus was crucified naked, and he was beat and left in such a shameful state. And he took on all of that shame. He took on everything. Like, that's how he died. He had the power to retaliate, and he didn't. Even if you don't believe that he had divine power, you got to think that he had a following, and he didn't use that following to get back. No, he literally died. He didn't lift a finger to cast judgment on anyone. He was known for spending time with sinners. He healed the sick. He healed the blind. He touched lepers. We're going to get into that. The example that we have of Jesus is like no other God that we know of in history. Probably why time literally revolves around the person, and that's how we know that our faith is rooted in something concrete. It's not an unreasonable faith. It's rooted around a person who we know existed in history, and if he claimed to be God, I have to evaluate those claims. So we can get into the more apologetic discussion if you want to. I'm positing that there's only one way to intimacy, true intimacy with God, true intimacy with people. That's through Jesus Christ. That's the only reason why I brought that up. But in order to kind of flesh out the second point, I wanted to go through a story specifically with Jesus. And let's focus on his character. Let's look at who he is, and let's look at who he interacts with. So there's a story in Luke chapter 5, starts in verse 12, goes into 13. And I just want to focus on these two verses. The story's a little longer than that. I think it goes to 16, but we're going to stay in these first two verses. It says, while Jesus, he was in one of the cities, there came a man full of leprosy. And so I just want to stop there. There came a man full of leprosy. If you don't know anything about leprosy, it's a flesh-eating disease that's absolutely disgusting. It literally makes the flesh rot and deteriorate. It's this nasty smell. In that time, lepers had their own colony that was outside of the city. They couldn't live in the city with people. They were unclean. In the Jewish community, they were unclean. If you were a leper walking through the streets, you would have to say, I'm unclean. You have to say unclean. And reason being, because if someone else touched a leper, they were an outcast of society too, because now they probably had leprosy. You can literally get it by just coming into contact with them. So nobody came into contact with these people. Now, when this leper saw Jesus, getting back into the verse, when this leper saw Jesus, he fell on his face and he begged him, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. And this is what Jesus did. Jesus stretched out his hand and he touched him. He said, I will be clean. And immediately the leprosy left him. Now, there's a lot just in these two verses. I just want to focus on earnestly believe God exists. We're going to get into the other part of the second step. But let's look at the context of the leper and what he may have been going through. I just gave you the backdrop of what his life may have been like. He's an outcast of society. He probably can't even remember the last person that touched him or listen to him. You don't know. All you know is he's dealt with this sickness and he's dying a slow, agonizing, painful death. But one of the things he knows is this man healed people. Now, you can come to a lot of conclusions from that. One of the conclusions that this man came to as a leper was that this is Lord. This guy, Jesus, is Lord. He says, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. He identifies Jesus as Lord. He's not just some regular guy. He falls down on his face and he begs him. He comes to a place where he recognizes my life is out of control. The sickness that I have that's eating away at my body, my physical existence, shows me how little control I have over this life. And I want peace because I know that I'm not supposed to live in this state of unrest. There has to be something outside of me that rectifies what I feel and what I know to be true. And what I know to be true in my spirit is I'm not supposed to be this leper. I'm supposed to be healed, which is why people have issues, which is why there's there's often a disparity in people's minds who suffer and struggle. People who have special needs, it's like they know their limitation. They know that full well, and they know, like, they see everybody else like, I wasn't supposed to be like this. They were not. All negative effects like that, they're because of sin. And that's how far sin has gone, right? But this leper understands, dang, I'm not God. There has to be something outside of me that can have an answer. If I'm out of control, there has to be somebody who is. And unless I get to the place where that leper got, where I throw myself down, face down, and I say, Lord, whatever I say after, it's not going to actually align with reality. The next step, principle 3, won't happen if Lord doesn't come first. I had to get to a low place in order to understand this concept. And it's not just past, it's also present. Like, I've talked about this before. I had to get to the place where I was literally messaging a prostitute on a dating app about prices. And I thought that I never could get there. That was what kind of rattled my world, shook my world, to show me that I was out of control, because I got to a place I never thought I could be. So my denial up to that point was so heavy because I judged people like that. God would continue to break my denial, showing me I was trying to take control of my chaos through pleasure, right? And I still try and take control of my chaos by numbing with pleasure. I'm trying to track my sobriety. I still have my accountability board. Right now I'm on day 6. And the only reason why I feel like I'm on day 6 is because the past 6 days, I've been really adamant about praying in the morning and spending time with Jesus. I've been trying to walk that step 7, which we'll eventually get to. But I'm constantly coming to a place where I recognize there are deeper levels that I'm recognizing that I try to take control. I try to lean on my own understanding. I try to control relationships. I try to control outcomes. Unless I step out of my denial of how I try to exercise this godlike control that is unhealthy and destroys myself and the people around me, and I actually believe that there is a Lord, I can't get to the fact that I matter to him. And that's one of the revelations that God has given me in thinking about the second step is I have to actually believe he is who he says he is. If he's Lord, then when I matter to him and he has the power to help me recover, it means so much more. He's not just anybody that's in control. No, 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 no. No, he's God. God. I have to actually come to the revelation that he is God. And so I'm confronted with that question. And it falls in your lap as well. Do I earnestly believe that God exists? Do you earnestly believe that God exists? Do you with full conviction know there is a higher power out there? And the money question is, how does this higher power affect how you live? Because it does. If it doesn't lead you to respond like the leper, face down, crying and begging, you're probably not at the spot. You're probably not at a place where your pain is greater than your fear. I remember calling Sean, and I was like, on my insides, I was basically begging. I have nowhere to go. I don't know what to do. I just know I need to come home. I need help. And then there's this continual process of continually walking through that doorway of poverty. So yeah, the next episode, I'm going to talk about matter and power. I'm going to talk about I matter to God, and he has the power to help me recover. And we've already touched a little bit on it, but I want to flesh it out in the second half of this next episode. Who is God? Do you believe that Jesus is God, that he is Lord? And Lord meaning master. Do you believe that he is master? Do you believe that he is God who literally spoke to the seas and quieted them? Do you believe that? My prayer for you as you listen is that God will grant you the power to love him, to know him, to trust him one step more than you did yesterday. Remember, this is a process, so embrace the process. No quick fixes, all right, guys? I love you. Stay tuned. The next episode is on matter and power. Thank you for tuning in.